My name is Matt Cunningham. I'm a fireman on the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge railroad.
My name is Steve Otten. My position here is Chief Engineer for the Durango-Silverton Railroad.
Your day always starts with the alarm clock. It varies on what train you are. Once you arrive, you have a meeting with your crew in which you go over kind of the plan for the day and what we're emphasizing, and the conductor will read a safety rule for all just to keep in mind throughout the day, and just to always be reviewing our safety rules and remembering what our proper procedures are.
The fireman and I, after the meeting is adjourned, will come down, get our engine on the cold dock out here. We do go through and check all the different appliances and appurtenances to make sure we have everything that we need. The fireman does all of his checking of the water. I will oil all the moving parts on the engine, check that everything's been greased for the day, and that the fireman has completed all of his tasks.
You're checking your sand dome, making sure your mechanical lubricator is full, filling up your oil cans so you have them. Every fireman has something a little different that they do in order to get that locomotive in the state that they prefer.
And then we'll bring the engine out onto the loop here in Durango. And once we throw the switch back, we'll both be on the locomotive, and I'll back up the locomotive and blow it, what we call blow it out, whereas I'll back up really fast and set the brakes so that we blow all the condensation out of the smoke box. So when we leave the platform in the morning, we're not getting all that cinders and gook all over all the passengers that are waiting for the next train. After we do that, we'll take the train up across 6th Street. We'll back up, hook into our train for the morning. Once we're hooked up and the trainmen have connected us with the air and everything, we will do a brake test on the automatic brake system with the car shop employees that are out there on the platform for the morning. We'll do an automatic brake test and a straight air brake test, as we have two different brake systems.
That's kind of when the fun starts. You see the passengers, you see the excited look on their faces as that engine comes out, and it's really, for a lot of people, it's being presented to them for the first time of the day.
The train will be loaded, we'll wait for our departure time, and I'll wait for a highball from the conductor, which is a wave of the arm, and once I get that, I'll blow the whistle, and we're off to Silverton. We have 4 locomotives of the K36 class built for the Denver Rio Grande in 1925, built at the same time in the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, and each one of those engines, the 480, the 481, the 482, and the 486, all have different personalities. You get to know their little quirks, how they're going to ride over certain sections of track. The whistles that the engineers blow, each engineer blows the whistle differently than the other engineer. So even in Durango, with people that frequent the railroad, and some of the times the employees that live near the tracks, they can tell who's on that engine by how the whistle's being blown. I try to, when I blow the whistle, I have my own style, obviously, as I just mentioned, but I also try to make it like you hear in the songs about railroading, where it's kind of mournful, and you can hear it off in the distance in some of the Hollywood movies. Each locomotive has its own distinct personality. Some of them, as the summer goes on, get beat up more than other ones, so you got to compensate even more, but you learn all their little idiosyncrasies and try to get them up to Silverton as best you can.
Well, we call it a live steamer or a dead steamer. Obviously, when it's alive, it's breathing fire and steam, and it's actually working. And each day, that one particular locomotive will operate differently. like a human being. He wakes up in the morning and he's going to operate a little bit different each day.
Steam engines are exactly like people, and they're moody people at that. There's some days where everything will just go right, and you just know what you're going to get. When you turn the key in your car, you know what you're going to get. When the pilot starts his engines on an airplane, he knows what he's going to get exactly. These engines can be so quirky, how they take water, how much coal they use, where you place the coal in each engine in order to get that engine at a temperature in which you desire. It's all a little bit different. And so when you go through a work week and say you're on a few different trains each week and those engines are on different trains, and so you're constantly on a different locomotive, you can have a great day on the 480, and then the next day go over and fire the 482, and you'd think it's the same design, same locomotive, it should act the same way. That's not the case, and it'll really throw you, especially when you first start out. Trying to get used to that and getting to know the personality of each of the engines is a struggle, but that's part of the fun of the job is finding out, okay, how is this engine going to behave today, and what am I going to need to do in order to fire it properly and get this train up the hill to Silverton. And so you're constantly adjusting, and the engine's telling you things, how it's going to act, and you adjust what you do accordingly.
There's a lot more finesse involved with a steam locomotive than there is in running a diesel. Running the diesel is more like operating a car. You just pull out the lever, put your foot on the gas in a car, and you go, basically.
Once you pull out of the station, you hit the road, you go through the valley. Valley's nice. It's almost a little bit of a warm-up round, if you will, for shoveling coal. When you're in the valley, the engine isn't working real hard, so you're not shoveling quite as much and putting as much water in the boiler. And then about 3/4 of the way through the valley, you hit Trimble Lane, and that's when things really start to pick up. You start building your fire up for the hill, and then once you hit Hermosa and cross 550 there, you are full-blown climbing the hill, and it really picks up. You're focusing very carefully on your water level, which is obviously your most important thing, and then shoveling coal as often as you can, or as often as needed. The engineer's job to watch all the straight track and right-hand curves, and then it is the fireman's responsibility to watch all the left-hand curves. And so you're trying to focus as much as you can on your fire and your water and what's going on inside the cab, but at the same time you can't get too focused on what's going on in there. You always have to remember that what's on the track ahead of you is just as important, if not more important. So it's a balance, and you stay really busy jumping around, hopping up in your seat to watch those curves, then hopping back down and throw some coal in, watching your water, watching your pressure. It's a busy time.
Teamwork is a must with railroading. It's in no way a one-man show. The engineer is depending on the fireman is dependent on the engineer to do everything correctly. The engine crew is dependent on their train crew to watch between the locomotive and the rear of the train and make sure that there's nothing going on in between.
We have 2 guys up in the engines, 3 guys up in the train, but that is our crew, that is our team for the day. Every part of that equation is just as important as the next. Without the fireman, there's no steam for the engineer to run the engine. Without the brakeman, there's nobody to couple and uncouple the cars and pass signals and make sure for passenger safety and all that. Every part of that puzzle is a key component, and the train cannot operate without one of those 5 positions.
Without that being a team operation, a lot could go wrong.
Get a nice break as we come through the High Line. It's a nice little 1.4% downgrade for a couple miles. You kind of get to relax a little bit. So after that, you start climbing again for another 3-4 miles until you hit Tank Creek. That's your first water stop. Hop up, pull the tank spout down and fill that tender with water, and that's always a nice feeling, knowing that you got a full tender of water behind you. Water is obviously the most critical part of the locomotive. If you have, not enough fire, you might lose a little pressure. It's not that big of a deal. If you get low on water, obviously it's a very, very critical deal. We then come through tall timber, which is where all the zip lining is, and that's pretty cool. A lot of times there'll be people zip lining you can see up in the trees. Really surprises a lot of the passengers. I think it's pretty cool. And then continue up through Cascade, and then up to Needleton, which is neat, which is where a majority of backpackers go in the summer to hike the Chicago Basin. So you're always dropping people off there, picking them up. After Needleton, you climb over what everybody refers to as 488, and that's milepost 488. It's 488 miles from Denver. And it's the steepest part of the line, and once you get over that hill, it's a little bit of a, hey, we're really getting there, we're getting close. You come through Elk Park, cross the river once again, so it's back on the left-hand side, which is always great as the fireman. You get the river on your side and the views. It's real pretty. The canyon's really steep and really deep for that last stretch from Elk Park into Silverton. You arrive into Silverton, sometime close to lunch. You're usually ready to eat about then, which is an exciting thought after shoveling about 4.5 to 5 tons of coal in the 3.5 hours it takes to get from Durango to Silverton. And once again in Silverton, you have more people excited to see the train, excited to greet the train, and being in the engine, you're on the front end of that train, so you get to see all that ahead of you, and that's not an experience a lot of people get, and it's really a cool feeling to see all the cameras come out, everybody smiling and pointing as the train pulls in.
I would say trainman code is safety first. Without you being ready for anything to happen, anything could happen. So safety first, prep and be ready.
I'd say if there was one thing I had to pick out that I don't prefer about my job, it's probably thunderstorms. Sometimes coming down that hill and you got the rain pouring down on you, you got thunder and lightning, you're looking at that river rushing right next to you. Just think about it a little bit.
Weather conditions create a lot of hazards, such as rain will bring down rocks and mud. High winds will bring down trees and rocks. And there are times that a lot of rain, a lot of wind, you should be scared. You should be concerned with what's ahead of you and what can happen.
And you're in a canyon that's very, very narrow and next to the river. There are washouts. You are in a steep canyon, so there's mudslides, avalanches.
Anything can happen at any time, so you have to be ready and heads up. It's all heads up.
As far as actually being, nervous or scared of the river or the canyon or the locomotive that I'm on, is not really an issue, and I think that's due large part to the great job that our crews do. Our shop crew does a good job, taking care of these engines, and they're running better now than arguably they ever have, since they were built in 1925. Our maintenance of way crew is always working on our right-of-way and making sure that everything's stable. We have patrolmen out there in front or behind of each train, making sure that everything with the tracks is in good shape. So by the time you go over that, there's been a lot of things that have been, checked on and done to ensure that, your passage over the track is going to be a safe one. Coming from Silverton to Durango is a lot different than coming from Durango up to Silverton. It's all downhill. You're really just monitoring your fire, monitoring your water, but as far as the engine using steam, there's only a few places that it really does so. The main one is the high line, which was downhill on the way up. So obviously it's going to be uphill on the way down. So you build up your fire a little bit for that. You know, you work a little bit. And then once again, you're dropping back down out of Rockwood to Hermosa, roll through the valley, back into town. More people once again with those cameras out and smiles and pointing excitement. And then once we get back into the yard, as a fireman, your day is just about over. Most of the switching is handled by the engineer, and then the conductor and the two brakemen are on the ground throwing the switches, coupling up cars, uncoupling cars, as we organize the trains for the next day. When we get back around the loop, away from the depot, we usually cut the steam engine off and put a diesel on, and that's done for a number of different reasons. The first is these engines run 90 miles a day, every day, three engines a day. So to say that our shop crew is busy is quite an understatement. And so if there's a lot of switching that we need to do and moving around cars and getting things made up for the next day, it's really a big benefit for the shop crew to not have to wait until all that switching is over to receive the locomotive and begin working on it. If there's something broken on one of these locomotives, they want to get to it as soon as they can. And so by cutting the steam engine off and putting a diesel on, they get a chance to get working on the engine. Sometimes you're switching for an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, and that's a long time when you have 3 engines to take care of per night and send back out for another 90-mile round trip the next day. And the other is just the smoke in town, running an engine back and forwards in a small area. The smoke builds up over time. So we cut the engine for that reason as well. Put your train away. You meet once again with your crew to discuss the day, and that's usually where it ends.
What I love about my job is I get to immerse the passengers in an era that's will never be again. I've always loved trains as far as I know. I've asked my mom how far back, and she goes, "Oh, before you got your first train set, you like trains," so it goes way back. I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for the steam locomotives, though. There's something in me, even though I was born at the very end of the steam era in the United States, there's just something about a steam locomotive. I guess it's because it's more raw, you can see everything moving, and it has more of a personality than a diesel. It's more out there so you can see it. But I can go home and watch a movie with another tourist railroad in it and see a big mainline steam locomotive running, and it totally inspires me to be here and do what I do. Not many people get to do what I do on a year-round basis, so the fact that I've spent enough time here to have gotten to this point to where I'm here year-round and can do it means a lot to me, and it also means a lot to my oldest son, who also got the railroad bug too. So someday, actually he's working in the museum, but someday he wants to be on the train too.
I feel a very big sense of pride and responsibility in what I do. You are being handed the torch of what you do from people who have done this sort of thing for hundreds of years on these exact pieces of equipment over these exact rails, you are carrying on a tradition, and a very prestigious tradition at that. Railroads were really the backbone of America expanding and being able to become what it is today. So when you're doing something that is so close and so relevant to so much and represents so much, you feel a big sense of pride and commitment. You are reminded of this sense of pride and commitment every day when you have kids coming up to you and asking you all these questions and looking at one of these steam engines and just being awestruck. You remember, that this is really something important and something magical. There's a lot of history out there, and history is spectacular, but there's very few places where you can see history so real, and it's a train being operated the same way that it was operated back then. Seeing a steam engine sitting quiet in a museum, you don't understand what it sounds like, what it smells like, the way that it acts or comes alive, the steam escaping, the sounds. Knowing that you are representing history in such a realistic and operating fashion to the next generation, you really are reminded every day that what you are doing is very important to a lot of people.
My job is a very unique job from any other jobs that I've had. The steam locomotive is a very unique machine, and it's an awesome machine. My particular position now is I get to do just about everything on the rail from A to Z. It's great. I get to work with awesome equipment, awesome people, awesome country. My office between Durango and Silverton is probably one of the prettiest offices you'll ever get in the country.